Hello there. Revelation 14 tonight. The lighting looks a little different. I look a little orange, but we'll carry on. So we're coming out of chapter 13, where we saw, if you remember, the dragon in chapter 12, and then the dragon calls these two beasts to himself, where we see a beast in the water, in the sea, and then a beast out of the land. The beast, the first beast, we kind of identified as Nero, or a Nero-like figure, the Roman Empire. There's no need to get too bogged down with the Nero thing, but it could a 666 could just be, a way of saying that this power is lesser than perfect, than 7777, that number of completion. But I think based on the resurrection piece and the numbers, that Nero is pretty good interpretation. But Nero, Roman Empire. And then the second beast was the imperial cult and the structures that promoted worship of the beast. So out of learning about this unholy trinity, learning about the dragon and the two beasts, chapter 14 is really like a response to that. So we end with the mark of the beast, and we end with the people who take the mark of the beast, those who dwell on the earth take the mark of the beast. And then 14, we begin with 144,000 who, remember, in chapter 7 have the seal of the Lamb, and that is the kind of counterpart to the mark of the beast. So the God's people have the seal of the Lamb on their forehead and on their hands, and those that follow the dragon, those that follow the beast, have the mark of the beast on their hands and their forehead. And we said that is kind of harkening back to Deuteronomy 6 and the Shema, and this idea of allegiance, not necessarily a literal microchip or something that would be put into us in the future, but something that was relevant to the people that were listening to the story. So we're going to jump into 14, and we're going to see that kind of response of God's people in the beginning, and then we see some judgments, and then visions, broad kind of visions of final judgment. So we'll just jump in to the first section here. So verse 1. Then I looked, and behold, on Mount Zion stood the Lamb, and with his 144,000, who had his name and his forehead written on their foreheads, who had his name and his father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven, like the roar of many waters, and like the sound of loud thunder. The voice I heard was like the sound of harpists playing on their harps. And they were singing a new song before the throne and before the four living creatures and before the elders. No one could learn the song except the 144,000 who have been redeemed from the earth. It's a really similar description of 144,000 who are singing, similar to what we kind of saw in chapter 4 and chapter 5, and the throne room. As believers are singing, it is a booming and beautiful song. It's like many waters, but also like the sound of harps playing. And this is the 144,000. So it says they're standing on Mount Zion. We had a good discussion, or is kind of a good point. Like, is this kind of the end of days? Is this like the end of everything, where God's people are kind of like in heaven or in God's presence singing? And I said, maybe, or it could just be a representative way of showing God's people. Because I think the big point here is kind of how this section ends. So we see God's people singing, and it's this beautiful song, just like we saw on the throne. Now the lighting just changed. I wonder if it changed on your end. It's interesting. But they have the name of the Father and the Lamb on their foreheads and heads. But then it says this, and I think this is the point. Who are these 144,000? This is who they are in verse 4. It is these who have not defiled themselves with women, for they are virgins. It is these who have followed the Lamb wherever he goes. These have been redeemed for mankind as first fruits for God and the Lamb. And in their mouth no lie was found, for they are blameless. So I think this is kind of the big point here, is these descriptions of 144,000. What are they like? And it starts by saying they have not defiled themselves with women, for they are virgins. So there are those that take this 144,000 as a literal end time group of Jewish believers. That's kind of the dispensationalist premill view, or lots of different views, but that is a popular view amongst that crowd. And like I said, I think I'm reading this book more as describing the reality that the seven churches were going through at the time. Certainly visions of the future, but more visions of the future to inspire hope, but also a lot of visions that just capture what they're going through at the time. So more grounded in the historical context. So these 144,000, if we're to say this is a future group of people, I think it's odd that they're all men and they're all virgins. And that just doesn't seem likely. Or I don't know, it just is it's an odd group for God to choose as kind of end time remnant. All men, all virgins. It's just odd. And that doesn't seem to work in that interpretation doesn't seem to work in their favor. So I think the symbolic number of the fullness of God's people is kind of a better way to read that. But so what's the virgins piece then? So the virgins piece, and we're going to see it later in this chapter, and then we'll see it big time in chapter 17, speaks to not compromising yourself in like idolatry. So in chapter 17, Roma and the Roman Empire is personified as the great prostitute, right? So Roma was the goddess of Rome, and she was on their coins and stuff, and that's kind of pieced together that through things like that is how we piece together kind of what we're talking about in Revelation 17, especially sitting on 7 hills, like Rome is the city on 7 hills. But the point there is that Rome is seen as this great prostitute, and this is an image from the Old Testament where idolatry and infidelity to God is kind of paralleled with like sexual immorality. So when we talk about them being virgins, I think if we're talking about metaphor, I think we're metaphorically speaking of the way they have not gone after idols and haven't cheated on God with the Roman Empire and the Roman imperial cult. Is I think what we're getting at there. And it says, so they haven't defiled themselves with their virgins. And it says that it's these who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. And I like that image too of 144,000. Who are these people? They're the ones that do the things the Lamb does. We've seen a lot of images here where God's people, like the biggest compliment they can get is that they look like Jesus. So I'm thinking of in the very beginning, chapter 1, Jesus is described as the faithful witness, and then in one of the first 7 letters, I can't remember which letter, John commends Antipas, who is a believer who gave his life, is martyred, and he's called also a faithful witness. So the believers are ones that follow the Lamb wherever he goes and do the things that the Lamb does, that Jesus did. And it is these have been redeemed from mankind as first fruits for God and the Lamb. And in their mouth no lie was found, for they were blameless. So this is a blameless group. And that first fruits is going to come up later in the chapter. So we're going to hold on to that and just jump to the next section here. So we kind of contrasted at the end of the last chapter, like who are the people of the mark of the beast? Who are the people of the seal of the Lamb here in the beginning? Who are these 144,000? And now we get a new image of kind of judgment. And we're going to get a lot of judgment from here to 14, 15, 16, 17. We get big pictures of judgment that are more focused on the beast, the Roman Empire, I think. So let's jump in at verse 6. Then I saw another angel flying directly overhead with an eternal gospel to proclaim, and those who dwell on the earth, to every nation, tribe, language, and people. And he said with a loud voice, fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come, and worship him who made heaven and the earth and sea and springs of water. So this first image, big eagle, or it's an angel flying. Eagle's coming later. This is an angel flying. And it says he has an eternal gospel to proclaim. This is a message of good news. And it's an interesting message here that fear God and give him glory because the hour of his judgment has come. So we've talked about this a little bit, it's a big theme in the Old Testament, the day of the Lord, but this idea that when God shows up, the day of the Lord, when God comes and makes things right, it is good news for God's people, right, who have been persecuted, who are suffering for righteousness' sakes. They're vindicated, right? It's good news. But then for those who practice evil and those who have oppressed God's people, it's bad news. So when you hear this eternal gospel, I instantly said, how is this? This is good. Sounds like God's about to lay the hammer down. And we got to remember, for a persecuted church, that's good news, right? That is that they're going to be vindicated, and that those that have oppressed them are going to be judged. So that's kind of the first image here. It's just an announcement that God is judging, and then we can keep going here. Another angel, a second, followed him. This is verse 8. Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, she who made all nations drink the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality. So this hits back on this idea of the 145,000 are virgins, and that idolatry is metaphorically kind of talked about as sexual immorality. So fallen is Babylon the Great. So what does that mean? So Peter does this too. 1 Peter 5:13, where Peter compares Rome to Babylon. Now, why would he do that? It was because we think about Babylon was the country that destroyed, Assyria, I guess, destroyed Jerusalem. So Babylon is the Babylonian captivity that where God's people are removed from the land and taken to Babylon. This is where you get Daniel's stories, where they're coming from. I remember Revelation is very shaped by Daniel. So you think of images or the stories like Daniel in the lion's den, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, where they're forced to worship false gods, to bow down to Nebuchadnezzar and not follow God. So Babylon is this giant empire who demands loyalty, who persecutes God's people, and wants you to worship their leader, right? So that's, you see kind of the parallels there with the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire is this giant empire. Now they're persecuting Christians, and so what the Christian authors do is they compare Rome to Babylon. So this announcement is that fallen is Babylon the Great. So this Roman Empire is not going to last forever. It's going to fall. And then she who made all the nations drink the wine of the passion of her sexual morality. So then just like the great prostitute image that's coming up later, Babylon, Rome is kind of the sin is that they made all the nations kind of worship and, cheat on God with their pagan worship. But this angel says it's time to judge Babylon. It's time to judge the Roman Empire. So then verse 9, another angel, a third, followed them, saying with a loud voice, if anyone worships the beast and its image and receives a mark on his forehead or on his hand, he will also drink the wine of God's wrath, poured full strength into the cup of his anger, and he'll be tormented with fire and sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. Let's keep going. And the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever, and they have no rest, day or night, these worshippers of the beast and its image, and whoever receives the mark in its name. So the third angel says, hey, just like God is judging Babylon, anyone that takes the mark of the beast and swears allegiance to Babylon and swears allegiance to the Roman Empire, you're going to be judged too. And there's harsh language here for that. You're going to be tormented with fire and sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. No rest day and night. These worshipers of the beast and its image. So that's kind of like, kind of starts very broad, right? In the first angel, fear God, God's judging. then God is judging Babylon, God is judging the Roman Empire. And third is that those that follow the beast, those that are allegiant to the Roman Empire and this evil empire that is persecuting God's people, you're going to be judged too. So then, verse 12, here's a call for endurance of the saints, those who keep the commandments of God and their faith in Jesus. And I heard a voice from heaven saying, write this, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Blessed indeed, says the Spirit, so that they may rest from their labors, for their deeds follow them. So unlike those that follow the beast, in verse 11 it says they're going to have no rest. In verse 13, God promises a blessing to those that die in the Lord. And he says, you're going to get rest from your labors. You're going to get rest from this persecution and the struggle, the tribulation that you're going through right now. So we've had first kind of part, this vision, 144,000, those that are loyal to the Lamb. We see these messages of judgment on really like the Roman Empire and those that follow the beast. And then now we see two images of these harvests. So one is called, some people call it like the wheat harvest, and the second one is like the grape harvest. We'll just read the first one, and then we're gonna jump back and talk about something in the first part of the chapter 14. So my Bible calls this the harvest of the earth. Harvest of the earth. Then I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and seated on the cloud was one like a son of man, with a golden crown on his head and a sharp sickle in his hand. So this is like a Jesus figure. Looking back at Daniel 7, we've seen Son of Man a few times here, and that's Jesus. And another angel came out of the temple, calling with a loud voice to him who sat on the cloud, put in your sickle and reap, for the hour to reap has come, for the harvest of the earth is fully ripe. So he who sat on the cloud swung his sickle across the earth, and the earth was reaped. So I think this is an image of God bringing his people to himself. So this is an image that people will kind of connect to the rapture here in Revelation. I think so far we haven't really seen rapture language, so I'm not ready to jump there as if this is two separate events. I think we're still talking about one event, right? That when God comes, it's good news for some, it's bad news for others. So this is the good news part for God's people. The Son of Man is coming, and he's harvesting his people to himself. So why I think this is God's people, I remember in verse 4 of 14, these people are called the redeemed from mankind, first fruits for God. And this is the first harvest here. And the next little portion here after this, there's another harvest that's more for judgment, talking about punishment for evil. So I think this first one here is Jesus. It's the Son of Man doing the harvesting. It is the first fruits, I think, just like in the beginning of verse 14. It also says that the earth is fully ripe. And we did see, like in the sixth seal, chapter 6, when the martyrs are crying out, how long, O Lord? And God says, just a little while until the full number of the martyrs is kind of complete, the full number of your order is complete. I can't remember how it says it, but this idea that all the martyrs need to kind of be killed, and all those who are supposed to die for Christ need to reach that full number, then God will take them. And that fully ripe kind of in this may point to that. So I think this first image, symbolically looking at when God comes, the harvest of the righteous, and this next part starting in chapter 17, I think is the harvest of the unrighteous. Then another angel came out of the temple in heaven, and he too had a sharp sickle. And another angel came out from the altar, the angel who had authority over the fire. And he called out with a loud voice to the one who had a sharp sickle, Put in your sickle and gather the clusters from the vine of the earth, for its grapes are ripe. So the angel swung his sickle across the earth and gathered the grape harvest of the earth and threw it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trodden on outside the city, and blood flowed from the winepress as high as a horse's bridle at 1,600 stadia. So here we have another image of harvest of the earth, but for judgment. The wine press has been kind of an image of judgment already, like in chapter, or we're going to see in chapter 19. But with this, I don't really have even too much to add, right? Because it's an image of judgment. We've seen a lot of those. I will say with the 1,600 stadia, I think similar to 144,000. Remember how 144,000 is 12 times 12, or 12 times 12 times 10 times 10. 12 being kind of the symbolic number of the church, of God's people, right? 12 tribes, 12 disciples. So 12 times 12, 10 times 10, 144,000. This one is 16 stadia. 4 times 4, 10 times 10. And we said 4 represents kind of the fullness of the earth, right? That there are the 4 winds blow earlier in, I can't remember what chapter that was. But it's like the 4 corners of the earth, or the 4 directions. So I think this is talking about where this blood flows pretty much the fullness of the earth, and it's a wide, it spreads very far. I think that's kind of what that's getting at, but not too much to add there. Just the harvest of the earth, I think, first is talking about the image of the righteous, second, image of the unrighteous. But I do think these are still referring to one event, and we'll probably talk about at some point. We'll just do an excursus and go just look at like Thessalonians and Jesus's words, where people will get kind of the idea of rapture. We'll probably talk about that at another point, because I don't think that's what that's getting in there. But that's chapter 14. We started into some of these judgments, and we're going to see more in 15, 16, 17, 18, and now they seem to be way more focused on Babylon, the fall of Babylon, the fall of the Roman Empire, the big picture conquering of this evil force that's opposing God, right? The dragon, and the dragon, the beast, those forces. So that is Revelation 14. We will jump in to maybe 15 and 16 next week. Awesome.